Hey, this is Joe Gilder from Home Studio Corner. Today, it's all about reverb. If you struggle with reverb, it's not your friend. I'm going to help you. I'm going to make it really easy for you because it doesn't have to be complicated. But first, let's listen to what reverb can do. Here's a mix I've put together, and I've actually got 3 different reverbs going on in this mix. First, let's listen to it without reverb, and then we'll add the reverb back in. Now, there's nothing wrong with that mix. It sounds good, it sounds full, all the elements of the mix are there, but listen to how much better it sounds once I add the reverb back in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play it with reverb for the first 4 bars, then I'll take the reverb away. Notice how much it changes when the reverb is missing from the mix. Here we go.
Are so much more than words upon the screen. I wish you would believe that you're a masterpiece.
The problem people run into with reverb is you discover that you have reverb in your system and then you just go nuts for a season adding way too much reverb. And then you come to your senses and you pull it back and then you can't hear it at all. And then you're trying to find this happy medium in between. The way I look at reverb, when I was learning how to mix, I went to school and learned a lot of stuff about audio. They talked about reverb as if it was intended to create the sense that all the musicians are in a room together. I don't think that's a super helpful way of explaining it. Unless you are mixing an orchestra and you need to place it, all the instruments are really dry and you need to place them in a sound space so they all sound like they're playing in a cathedral. Unless that's the case, that's not really how I think about reverb at all. I think about reverb more like a guitar player with a pedal board. When I'm playing my guitar on a song, there are some songs that just call for a reverb sound. Now, there are different types. See, if you're a guitar player, you're going to get this a lot quicker than folks who don't play electric guitar a lot. If I'm playing a gig or playing at church or whatever, some songs are going to call for a spring reverb. Great. And that may be on all the time. But then other songs might call for a bigger plate reverb with more ambience to it. And then others might call for reverb and delay. I'm not playing those things so that the audience can imagine that I'm sitting in the middle of a cathedral. I'm playing them because it gives me the tone that I want to create the vibe that I'm looking for in the song. That's how I view reverbs as well. So real quick, in case you don't know how I set up reverbs, these 3 white colored tracks over here are my 3 different reverbs. There's a room reverb, a plate reverb, and a spring reverb. I'll go over those in a second. The way I use them, they're sitting over here on the right-hand side of my session, and then inside my session, you can see I am using sends to send a copy of certain tracks over to these reverbs. So this electric guitar is going to the spring reverb, this piano and these other keyboard parts are going to the plate reverb, and the drum bus is going to the room reverb. Okay? Now, of these 3, the only one I'm really using in the more traditional sense to create a sense of room is, of course, the room reverb. These drums were recorded in my last house in the basement. Not much of a room sound there, and I really wanted it to, the final mix actually of this song had no reverb because I wanted a really dry drum sound. But for the sake of this video, I added some room reverb to give you an idea of what it does. I'm not looking for something dramatic like an 80s, gated reverb sound from a Phil Collins song, although that has its place. This, I was just looking to give the illusion that we recorded the drums in a fairly nice space. So here are the drums by themselves, and then I'll turn the reverb on. It's just a little subtle extra something on top, specifically on the snare drum. The snare hits and you hear a little whoosh happening. Now, Here is one of the biggest, there's the second biggest mistake that people make with reverb. The first was either using too much or too little. The second was not EQing the reverb itself. I'm going to turn this second plugin off for a second. Listen to how much worse this reverb sounds with that EQ off. Better yet, let me solo just the reverb so you can hear it. Couple things there. First of all, that's not natural. A room wouldn't have that much low end to it. Here's the reverb that I'm using. It's just the Room Reverb plugin inside of Studio One, and I've got it set to just shy of a second tail time in a decent sized room. That's what works for me. It's based off the Medium Studio preset if you're using Studio One. And then I've got the fat channel on after the reverb. And all it's doing is a high-pass filter at 200 hertz, and then I've actually pulled out more lows and mids, because one of the things reverbs do, and I don't know why, but they almost all do them, is they tend to accentuate the low end. It's not their fault. They're trying their best, but they just do. So again, here it is without EQ. And here it is with the EQ. Now, you may initially hear that and say, oh, but it's lost all the punch and all the warmth and all the bigness of the drum sound. No. Remember, this is just reverb on top of the drum mix itself. Here's the drum mix without reverb. That kick and snare are doing just fine. They don't need any more warmth or low end or anything like that. They just need the parts of the reverb that we're going to hear over an entire mix, which typically means the upper frequencies. We're not going to hear as much of the low mids and the lows, and we don't need to. That's one of the leading causes of muddy mixes for people, is the reverb is muddy. They're over here EQing the drums trying to fix the problem. It was the reverb all the time. That reverb just sits on top. We just hear it right after the snare, versus this. Listen to that kick drum. Instead of being a nice punchy kick, it does this woof thing. And you would be right to assume, oh, something's wrong with my kick drum. Let me scroll over to the left in my mix and EQ the crap out of my kick. That's actually not the problem. The problem is right over here. It's the reverb. You hear that? Woo. Now, one solution is don't run your kick to the reverb, but this would happen with the snare or anything you run to this reverb. A safe bet is to always have EQ on the reverb. If nothing else, always have a high-pass filter that's rolling off everything below 200 hertz. That's my default setup for all three of the reverbs that I have here, because it's just something that happens across all of them. Okay, I talked too much about that one, but that was the most important thing I wanted to share with you. The other two reverbs that I use, these are strictly more vibey reverbs. The first is a plate reverb. I've shown this one before, but I'll show it to you again. It is the same Room Reverb plugin, but it's using the flat plate preset. All that is if you look at it, they literally took a room with dimensions and turned it into a 1 meter wide room, which is essentially the shape of a plate. If you recall, like the actual plate reverbs are these big metal plates. Anyway, it actually sounds phenomenal if you put a really long decay time or length on the reverb. This one is pushing 7 seconds long. Now, that may sound ridiculous, and it kind of is, but if you just give little amounts to it, it can work wonders. For example, my keyboards, most of my keyboards are going to this reverb. Listen to the space that it provides. If we turn that reverb off and back on, just so you can hear what's happening, it's almost taking whatever you put into it and turning it into some sort of a keyboard pad. Listen to it by itself. I'll even, on ballads like this, I'll even put the lead vocal through it. As you can see here, my vocal bus is going to this reverb. Now, it's a small-ish amount, and it's just enough to kind of hear between phrases, but it can be such a cool, almost extra sound in your mix.
You are so much more than words upon a screen.
Now, same thing as before. If I don't have this reverb after, it's just a muddy mess.
You are so much more than words upon a screen.
That one wasn't as muddy of a mess, but that does happen a lot. And then the third type of reverb is a spring reverb. Of the three that I'm showing you today, this is the only one that doesn't come with Studio One Pro out of the box. I actually bought a pack of, I thought it was just a couple of spring reverbs. Turns out it's like 50 different spring reverb impulse responses that load into this open air plugin that does come with Studio One. So you can load impulses into this. Found one that I liked, and so I use this when I want something with a little more brightness to it, or electric guitar, because electric guitar going to a spring reverb, which, by the way, if you're not familiar, that's the reverb chamber inside of, for example, a Fender guitar amp. They use spring reverbs a lot of time. It has a unique sound. It's kind of a boingy, metallic sort of sound, and it tends to be a bit brighter. So here's what that sounds like on this electric. Let's go right here. Let's listen to the reverb just by itself. So the original guitar I recorded with tremolo. I don't think there's much reverb on the original guitar track, but the cool thing about doing it this way, recording the guitar dry and then sending it to this spring reverb, is this spring reverb is stereo. So even if I love the spring reverb on my Fender Deluxe, which I do, but if I want it to be wider, then I'll add this stereo spring reverb in the mix, and it just gives it this little extra width. Just a little bit, and it's nice and warm. Same thing here. We've taken out the low end so it's not too muddy. Just subtle differences, but you could hear it the best on the drums. But I've just realized I've been burned so many times by reverbs or delays that were just really muddy, and it took me forever to figure that out, that now I always have something in them. Even these delays over here, you can look and see they've got a low cut at 234 hertz because I just don't want to have any surprise muddy accidents over on my effects chains over here. All right, that's it for this video. If you are mixing with reverb, set it up like this. Use subtle amounts. EQ your reverbs. Don't use too much, and don't worry about putting everything inside a certain space. Give the different tracks what they need. Some tracks will need long reverbs, some will need roomy reverbs, and some might need a brighter reverb like a spring reverb. You don't have to use the exact ones that I use, but have 2 or 3 sitting there waiting for you to send something to them, and start experimenting with that and see what happens. Thanks so much for watching this video. If it was helpful for you, hit the like button. Be sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.